Right, we're about halfway through Orc-tober, so let's be honest, it would be absolutely criminal to not talk about the lads themselves, the orcs. So let it be known, there is so much lore here that it would just essentially be an entire movie if I was to try and cram it all into one video. So please, if you make it to the end, let me know in the comments if you'd like me to do a follow-up video, because as always, this is a beginner-friendly introduction, and comments, they're always welcome to support new people who are obviously new to the hobby. So if you do have any really cool facts about orcs, obviously not something random like deep sea fishing, any cool facts about orcs that would help somebody new, then please drop them in the comments. You know where I'm going. I'm not going to stop waffling. Let's go. And also, I forgot to say thank you to anybody who has sent in pictures for me to use within this video. It's why we're the best community of nerds on the internet, really. I really do appreciate you. So let's go again now. We're going. If you somehow missed them, I need you to imagine essentially a bunch of Millwall supporters on an intergalactic away day, only they're green and built like industrial fridges and technically made out of fungus. Don't know where I'm going. That's your average orc. They live for fighting and shouting and anything that goes boom if it explodes. They're over the moon with that. And if it doesn't, then essentially they're just going to belt it with a wrench until it does. Orcs don't really do subtlety. Diplomacy, not really either. Strategy, not unless like hit it harder counts. Their battle plan usually just bolts down to find something that moves, hit it until it stops, and then hit it a little bit more just for good luck. It shouldn't work, but it somehow does, probably because there are millions of them and they're having far too much fun to care about dying. And that's essentially how it goes down. In the lore, they're called greenskins, which it does sound quite polite for somebody new until you realise it essentially means massive, angry mushroom men. They're part fungus, which means even if you nuke them, they just grow back later from spores like mould, but on a galactic scale. You think you've wiped them out, and then next week they're back, nicking your vehicles and painting them red because it makes them go faster. Now, originally, they were called space orcs, which is exactly what they are. Someone at Games Workshop clearly went, what if we took fantasy orcs, gave them guns, and then told them space was full of stuff to hit? And it stuck. And they've got that same classic orc energy. They love fighting. They've got terrible teeth and a deep spiritual belief that more noise equals more power. So yeah, orcs aren't really an army. They're more like a galaxy-sized pub brawl that's just gotten wildly out of hand. You can't reason with them, you can't stop them, and honestly, you wouldn't want to. They're like the galaxy would just be a lot duller without a few lads shouting, "Wah!" revving up guns and made from like literal scrap metal. Right, so here's where, for me anyway, it gets quite interesting. Nobody is quite sure. My chair is spinning. Hi, look at that. I'm like that guy from, well, whoever has a spinny chair. Nobody's sure where they actually came from. Their origins are all a bit mysterious, proper like lost era of the Jedi archives stuff, and the kind of history that Yoda would like squint at and say, forgotten this has been. That was terrible Yoda impression. Wow. Anyway, most people think they were cooked up like ages ago by these ancient all-powerful beings called the Old Ones. It's proper like cosmic nerds. They were just essentially going around creating new species like it was a Sunday DIY project. The theory goes that the orcs were made as these like ultimate soldiers built of war, impossible to kill off and able to survive basically anywhere. Think of them as like the galaxy's answer to cockroaches. If cockroaches were 7 feet tall, carried axes and shouted "Wah!" before punching tanks. Anyway, now the really like mad, wild, cool, I don't know, interesting part is that their wah energy, I'm not just doing that because I'm weird, it's this weird like psychic field that builds up when orcs, they get together and they just essentially start having a laugh, or more accurately a fight. The more orcs believe something will work, the more likely it does. It's the whole reason Cher created that song in the first place. Do you believe? And I like to hope. So essentially, if a Mek, which is basically an orc engineer who's like the lad that thinks duct tape and shouting counters quality assurance, if he slaps a few bits of scrap together and calls it a gun, it'll probably shoot. Not because it's actually well made, because it's really not. It's held together by hope and rust. But because the orcs believe it will work, it's gonna bloody work. Their collective faith in more Dakka, which in Orc speak just means more guns, more bullets, and preferably louder ones, is so strong it somehow bends reality into agreeing with them. To an Orc, the solution to every problem is always make more Dakka. Gun jammed, needs more Dakka. Enemy still standing, definitely more Dakka. Run out of ammo? Just shout louder and believe harder. The universe might take the hint. Now, everyone else in the galaxy thinks that Orcs are just basically a bunch of these dumb, violent nutters, which, fair play, they're not entirely wrong, but they're winning. There are more of them than pretty much anyone else. They spread like mold in a student's fridge. And every time you think you've wiped them out, another mob just turns up somewhere else, shouting and shooting at the sky. Some reckon there are even more Orcs than humans. And that's saying something. The scary bit, as bad as the Orcs are now, this is them sort of like disorganised. Most of the time they're just too busy fighting each other to bother taking over the galaxy properly. But if but if they ever stopped scrapping amongst themselves and they actually united under one boss, well, that would probably be it. Galaxy done, pack up your bolter and go home. Luckily, Orcs being Orcs, they'll never stop fighting each other just long enough to manage that. It's basically built into their DNA. The universe's biggest case of can't play nice with others. Still, you've got to admire them in a way. I mean, they're violent, they're daft, they're utterly indestructible, the true working class heroes of the grim dark future. So if we talk about what they actually are, if you picture a 7 or even 8 foot tall slab of muscle covered in scars, green as a traffic light, and with green skin that says, I'm about to hit something really bloody hard, that's your typical Orc. They're built like tanks, heal like video game bosses, and they can shrug off injuries that turn most other species into like red paste. Now, here's where I think it gets a little bit strange. So they don't have parents. You might consider that lucky, like no bedtime. They don't need them. Instead, like I mentioned earlier, they're just reproduced by spores, these little fungal cells that they come off their bodies and they grow into like new orcoid life forms. When an Orc dies, its body just releases millions of these spores into the air and the soil. And then before long, you've got a whole new Orc ecosystem sprouting up like mold on that bread that you forgot about, the bottom of your bread bin. Now, those spores can grow into all sorts of like orky creatures. The smallest ones are called snotlings. Think of them as tiny, daft, almost gremlins, I suppose, that they scuttle about doing odd jobs. Then there are Gretchen or Grots. Now, these are like a little bit bigger and are definitely a lot cheekier. Now, they're basically goblin-sized Orcs used as servants, ammo carriers, general cannon fodder. And finally, when conditions are right, some spores, they grow into full-sized Orcs, big, loud, and ready to punch something. Now, this system, it makes the Orcs basically unkillable as a species. You can nuke them from orbit, burn the planet, come back a few months later to check on the aftermath, and essentially there they'll be waving their guns and essentially just starting another fight. It's like the world's worst case of garden weeds, but they've all got chain axes. Now, the really fascinating and slightly terrifying thing about Orcs is their psychic field, sort of this invisible energy that they all give off just by existing. It's like if belief itself were contagious. The more Orcs there are in one place, the stronger the psychic vibe comes in. It's what makes their mad technology sort of like actually work, even when it shouldn't. If enough Orcs believe their rickety gun will fire, somehow it's gonna fire. Now, we did talk about this earlier on, but this shared psychic power, it also fueled something called the WAAAGH, which is essentially, if you're ever wondering how to pronounce it, just imagine you've just stood on Lego and stubbed your toe at the same time. WAAAGH isn't just a war, it's a full-blown galactic event. It's part invasion, part pilgrimage, part massive interstellar pub cruel with extra shouting when a powerful orc leader, this is called a war boss, manages to bash enough rivals' heads together, unite the tribes, then their collective energy builds up into a storm of like violence and pure excitement. The result is essentially billions of orcs charging in the same direction, leaving destruction in their wake. Entire star systems get flattened under the sheer chaos of it all. It's essentially the closest thing orcs have to religion. Fighting because it's fun, because it's holy, because it's just another manic Monday. Now, luckily, the rest of the galaxy, for the rest of the galaxy, orcs, they spend most of their time fighting each other. Now, every now and then, one of them gets big and mean enough to pull everyone together for a galaxy-sized punch-up, but they usually end up falling out and just essentially starting all over again. Still, whenever a proper WAAAGH gets going, even the toughest armies start sweating because when orcs come knocking, they do not stop until everything is either smashed, burning, or joining in. So orc society, if you can call it society, is basically one big noisy playground where the biggest lad automatically becomes head teacher. Now, the orcs, they live in tribes and everything runs on one simple rule, which is the biggest orc is in charge. The top dog's called the war boss, and he's usually the nastiest, the meanest, the loudest lump of green muscle in the group. Leadership isn't earned through democracy like clever speeches and good management skills. It's earned by punching harder than everyone else. Orc culture, it values three things above all else, and those look like strength, brutality, and cunning. Being clever's fine, but being able to rip the arm off a space marine and use it as a club or a toothpick, now that's what really gets you noticed. Now, naturally, that means orc society is full of infighting because every other orc fancies a go at being boss. The result is just a kind of permanent, like I said, pub brawl, essentially, with a mild management structure. Now, below the war boss, you have the boys with a Z, because, you know, it's like a cool boy band. Now, they're regular orcs, the backbone of every war band. They do most of the fighting and the looting and the shouting. Some boys, they carry guns called shooters, and they're known as the shooter boys. Now, others prefer big, crude blades called choppers. These are known as, you guessed it, chopper boys. And the difference really just comes down to whether they want to make things explode from a distance or up close and personal. Now, the orcs' way of life is just as simple as they are, really. See, smash, and repeat. Like you're going on holiday to Ibiza. They don't overthink things like when they're fighting or how to fight better. They just get on with it, guided by instinct and enthusiasm. Their entire culture, or culture, as they proudly call it, runs on timeless principle. Might makes right. If you're bigger, if you're louder, if you hit harder than the next lad, congratulations, you're now in charge. Now, orcs instinctively, they just obey anybody bigger and greener than themselves, and they'll never take orders from anyone who isn't a fellow orc. The really big ones, the proper monsters, are war bosses, like I said, or warlords. Now, they can stand 10 feet tall. They're broader than like a fully armoured space marine. Some rise to power through like sneaky tricks or good tactics, and most just batter the competition until everyone else agrees they're in charge. Now, to keep things running, and obviously to avoid being interrupted mid-fight, the war boss relies on a gang of lieutenants. No, these are called, don't clip it, these are called knobs. Knobs are larger and nastier than regular orcs, dripping with stolen trophies and attitude to match. Now, they're the ones who sort of like, they enforce things, the ones who make sure that everyone remembers who's boss, usually by punching them through a wall if they happen to forget. And the vast majority of the orc horde, which can number in the thousands, now that's made up of mobs of boys, especially the ones from the Goth clan. And these guys, they pride themselves on having the biggest and the loudest mobs in the galaxy. Goths, they think fancy tactics are for cowards, and their approach is basically run at that until it stops moving. Okay. Now, orcs aren't exactly what you'd call productive citizens. If something doesn't involve fighting, shouting, or building a bigger gun, then they tend to just lose interest pretty fast. Now, that's where the Gretchen, the Grots, come in. Now, Gretchen are, like I said, smaller goblin orcoids who handle all the boring stuff. The cooking, the carrying ammo, running errands, generally being on hand for when an orc wants something else to kick. Now, the funny thing is that these guys, they don't really mind doing these jobs. To them, getting bossed around by orcs is just like the natural order of things. The clever ones actually make a decent life for themselves, running little like black market businesses on the side, brewing fungus beer and roasting squigs, which are basically angry alien animals that taste surprisingly good, or organising bets on sort of like whenever a high fight breaks out. Now, of course, when the fight's over, they're usually like the first to loot the bodies too. Waste not, want not, right? Have that on your wall instead of live, laugh, love. Now, all in all, orc society might look like a mess, and to be fair, it is a mess, but somehow it works. They've not got politics, art, or education, but they do have one thing that really matters to be an orc, and that's just have a good scrap and plenty of lads to have that good scrap with. This part's going to need an entire video, so I will just kind of try and give it as overview as best as I can. While all orcs love a good scrap, while we're on that subject, they're not all the same flavour of green chaos. Now, orc society is split into different clans, each with its own vibe, its own symbols, its own favourite way of smashing things. Think of them like football clubs, but they're all playing the same game, just with wildly different styles and just as much shouting. So a few of the big names that you're going to come across. Goths, we've talked about them briefly. Now, these are like your classic orcs. They're loud, they're angry, they're built for punching, and they reckon that guns are fine, but nothing beats the feeling of introducing someone's face to a big old metal axe. They paint everything black because, black looks tough, and they pride themselves on getting stuck in up close. Subtlety is not a word in the Goth dictionary. Then we have the bad moons. Sounds cool, right? But they're the posh orcs, or at least as posh as fungus-based hooligans can get. Now, orcs actually grow their own teeth back, and teeth, or teeth in orc speak, are their currency. Bad Moon's teeth grow the fastest, which basically makes them rich. So naturally, they spend their wealth on the biggest guns, the flashiest armour, and anything shiny enough to blind an enemy like 10 paces away. If orcs did Instagram, Bad Moons are like your influencers of Orkstagram. Now, I'm not funny. Then you've got Evil Sons. Now, the Evil Sons, they're slightly obsessed with going fast. If it's got wheels, an engine, or even a vague chance of exploding, they're going to paint it red, because everyone knows red goes faster. Now, they're all about roaring across battlefields in clouds of smoke, noise, and exhaust fumes. Think Mad Max, but with more shouting and fewer seatbelts. Then we've got Death Skulls. Now, the Death Skulls are the sneaky ones. Well, as sneaky as a 7-foot-tall green guy can be. They're the scavengers and the looters. They're going to nick anything that's not nailed down, even a few things that probably are nailed down. Now, if you leave your tank unattended for even a few minutes, you'd be surprised if it comes back blue and covered in orc glyphs. They paint themselves blue for luck, because apparently blue's lucky, and you can't argue with results. They're still alive after all, and that's all that matters. Then you've got snake bites. Now, the snake bites, they're like your old school orcs, the back in my day crowd. They're suspicious of fancy tech, and they prefer to keep things traditional, with things like spears and axes, squigs, and good, honest violence. They're also the most superstitious bunch. They're always muttering about what weird omens and the old ways, and basically they're the orc equivalent of the uncle who just insists music was way better before electricity. Each clan thinks its way is the best way, of course, and they'll happily fight each other to prove it. But when a proper WAAAGH kicks off, they're all piling together. Goths smashing heads, Evil Sons roaring around on bikes, Bad Moons, blasting away with golden shoots, death skulls looting everything in sight, and snakebites trying not to roll their eyes at the lot of them. Orcs aren't just good at fighting, though. I know we've talked about it a lot. They're born for it. It's literally in their DNA. If an orc is not fighting, he's thinking about fighting. He's building something that can help him fight, or he's arguing with another orc who fights better. Combat isn't what they do, it's literally who they are. Now, when it comes to technology, they have what you might call a creative approach. They don't really understand how things work. They just bash bits of scrap metal together until it makes like a noise. And then if that noise sounds dangerous, then that job's a good one. The mad geniuses behind it all, we talked about them earlier. Now, they're called Meks. At the beginning of the video, you'll remember I described them, I think something along the lines of orc engineers who they'll somehow build tanks, planes and death rays out of literal junk. None of it should work, but thanks to that weird orky psychic field and a healthy dose of optimism, it usually does. Their weapons are exactly what you'd expect. Big, noisy, utterly unsafe. Orc guns are called shooters, and their entire design philosophy can be summed up to more Dakka. Now, again, spoken about it earlier, but Dakka basically means more bullets and louder guns. If one gun's good, two's going to be better, and if two's not enough, then strap on 4 and start pulling triggers until something explodes, preferably the guy you're shooting at, but they're not too fussy. Then there are the vehicles. Now, absolute monstrosities of metal exhaust fumes and just really bad ideas wired together. You've got battle wagons, which are just giant, like clanking tanks covered in spikes and armor plates and whatever spare guns were lying around. You've got war buggies, which are fast, ramshackle death traps just driven by cackling orcs who treat health and safety as a myth. And they're usually painted, like I said, red because they genuinely believe that red ones go faster. Now, orc strategy, if you can call it that, is refreshingly straightforward. Essentially, find the enemy, point everything at them and then run forward, shouting "Wah!" until one side stops moving. Precision shooting, tactical retreats, no. The orc way is all about essentially just getting stuck in, preferably face to face and covered in oil, smoke, and someone else's blood. It's messy, it's chaotic, and it is absolutely... That's my stomach rumbling. I can hear that. I'm so sorry. It absolutely shouldn't work, but somehow it does. Because for an orc, there is literally no greater joy than a proper scrap, a loud gun, and something big and angry to smash. Now, make no mistake, the orcs, they're an absolute powerhouse of a species. While most civilizations in the galaxy, they're just desperately clinging on to survival, the orcs are out there just multiplying like mushrooms after the rain, taking over planets almost by accident. They don't need trade routes, fancy governments, or even peace treaties. Give them dirt, scrap metal, and something to hit, and they'll thrive. But the really cool part is that they don't just exist in like the physical world. They've also got a presence in the warp, which is basically, if you're new, a psychic dimension that kind of feeds off emotions and thoughts. Think of it as like a spaces like dodgy underbelly full of gods and demons and really bad decisions. Just like humans have their chaos gods and the Eldari, who are the space elves, have their own weird things going on, the orcs' collective feelings have birthed their own gods, the mighty brawling duo known as Gork and Mork. Now, according to orc theology, and that is a generous word here, Gork is brutal and cunning, and Mork is cunning and brutal. Subtle difference, but it matters to the orcs because Gork smashes you in the face and laughs about it, and Mork waits until you're not looking, and then he knees you in the groin. Both approaches are equally admired. Gork and Mork, they're proper heavyweights in the warp, colossal, rowdy deities who've never been beaten. Now, when other gods try to challenge them, they just get clubbed halfway across the cosmos while Gork and Mork laugh their heads off. You can imagine the warp shaking like a pub after last orders when two get going. Now, to get a sense of what they look like, you only need to glance at the Orcs' massive war machines. Things like Gargants and Stompas. These are like these enormous, clanking metal monstrosities built by the Mek boys, the Orc engineers, to resemble their gods. They're basically like walking, shooting, screaming statues of Gork and Mork, stomping about and flattening everything in their path. And the Orcs, they love them. They're both weapons and religious icons rolled into one. Now, there are also similar, sort of relatively speaking, versions called Gorkanauts and Morkanauts, which are these huge armoured suits piloted by especially unhinged orcs. The pilots often claim to have visions of Gork and Mork shouting encouragement in their heads mid-battle, which, to be fair, sounds about right for an orky-like divine intervention. Now, as for religion, Orcs don't really do organised worship. There's no church, there's no priesthood, there's certainly no hymns. The closest thing they've got are the weird boys. Now, these are orc psychers who act like walking lightning rods for the psychic energy of their mobs. So sometimes they claim to hear the voices of Gork and Mork, usually right before something explodes. There's the occasional whisper about yellers, who are meant to be like orc priests, but I think they're more of a rumour than anything else. Don't quote me on that though, please comment if I've got that wrong. And then, of course, there's this guy, his name, Christ, I'm going to give it a go. Gazgul Mag Uruk Thraka. Now, he's like the legendary Goth warlord. Now, he insists that both Gork and Mork speak directly to him. And considering how much destruction follows him wherever he goes, he might actually be telling the truth. There's even been like talk in old lore of a third god called Bork, but he's been sort of like quietly dropped, probably got hit too hard by one of the others. Now, when you get down to it, wow, I feel like I'm on like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It isn't about like deep philosophy. The average orc doesn't care whether Gork's meaner or Mork's sneakier. They just want whichever one gives them more luck in a fight. For orcs, faith is simple. If shouting their god's name helps them hit harder, then that's enough. Some reckon Gork and Mork might even be like two sides of like the same being, one god, with a split personality, like the universe's biggest mood swing. Either way, to the orcs, they don't really care. They don't give a shit. So long as they've got someone up there egging them on to smash stuff, then they're happy. And according to the weird boys, the voices of Gork and Mork are getting louder these days, calling all orcs to the biggest scrap of the Great WAAAGH, the final galaxy-wide brawl where every orc joins in one last glorious punch-up. The Chaos Gods might have their schemes, but Gork and Mork, I think they've got something far simpler. Just essentially a good laugh, a big stick, and an infinite supply of orcs ready to swing it. Now, if there's one thing that they love almost as much as a good scrap, it's kind of building something massive that it makes loud noises and it explodes regularly. Now, enter their pride and joy. And we talked about them briefly earlier, the Gargants and the Stompas. Now, Gargants are the bigger of the lot. Think of them as towering metal-clad monsters that stomp across the battlefields, belching smoke and spitting fire from about 20 different guns at once. They're the orcs' answer to the Imperium's Titans. You know, those like skyscraper-sized war robots that the humans are so proud of, but with way more rivets, more noise, and just far less regard for physics. Slightly smaller, though still absolutely enormous, are Stompas. Think of like a Gargant's little brother, I suppose. Still huge, still terrifying, just slightly easier to build, and a lot more common. Now, both of them are walking symbols of orc power, like mobile statues of their gods, Gork and Mork, but out of scrap metal and hope and the occasional unfortunate Gretchen who got welded by accident. Now these mechanical monsters, they come to life through a mix of orc ingenuity, scavenged junk and scavenged junk, and a generous helping of energy. Now, that psychic field of belief is what makes the orc tech work. When the local big mech, like I said, orc engineer with delusions of grandeur and zero health and safety awareness, now when he gets what he calls divine vision from Gork or Mork, he sets about building one of these things. Usually that means sort of like hammering metal plates together until it vaguely looks like a god with guns for arms. Now, of course, as soon as one big mech starts building... I can't talk today. Building a Gargant. All of the others want to outdo him, and before long, the whole planet's covered in half-built war machines, booming engines, and orcs arguing over whose is a proper orky. Does that work? Now, when that happens, you essentially get this full-blown, like, brewing, because nothing gets these lads hyped like a few brand new walking fortresses ready to fight. The Gargant, I think, family, it comes in all sizes. You've got little killer cans, like a tiny stompy walkers piloted by single brave or stupid Gretchen, all the way up to the mighty mega Gargants, which are so big they could flatten a city just by tripping over. And then you've got killer cans, like I said, the orc version of like a space marine dreadnought, only much rattlier, smellier, and are more likely to blow itself up mid-battle. And if you're looking at a Stomper, particularly on the other hand, it's more of like a team effort. I guess it's cobbled together from whatever scrap the orcs can find: rusty plates, stolen guns, engine parts, maybe even a door or two from someone else's tank, and it takes a whole crew of orcs and grots, the short for Gretchen, to keep running, sort of reloading the guns, kicking the engines, and then occasionally sort of bawling out smoke with buckets. The weapons, Stompas are covered in guns, like a porcupine covered in quills. Big shooters, you've got scorchers, that's flamethrowers, but orc style. Then you've got death cannons, and the mighty super gatler, which is, it's basically a machine gun the size of a bus. Now, some Stompers even carry mobs of boys inside, ready to jump out mid-battle and join the punch-up the old-fashioned way. Now, when things get close and personal, a Stomper brings out its mega chopper, a giant spinning blade that can slice through the fortresses, tanks, or even the Imperial Titan if it's feeling particularly cheeky. It's the kind of weapon that makes no sense at all, but when it connects, you suddenly understand everything about why orcs are just so bloomin' happy all the time. To the orcs, these clanking, roaring machines aren't just weapons, they're holy icons of like pure orkiness, lumbering shrines to their gods. They crash, they burn, they explode, and they make a beautiful racket doing it. And really, what could be more divine than that? So here's the thing. They're not just a bunch of green lunatics rampaging around the 41st millennium. They're also one of the most beloved factions in Warhammer 40K, particularly in the tabletop game, and for good reason. Now, when you play orcs, you're not just commanding an army, you're embracing chaos itself. You can field mobs of boys led by a towering war boss, backed up by an arsenal of ramshackle vehicles like Gorkanauts and Morkanauts, giant stompy war machines named after, we talked about, their mischievous gods. It's all noise and smoke and shouting, and it is glorious. Orc armies, they thrive on close combat, big numbers and pure randomness. Their guns, they're not accurate, but they make up for it by firing a truly ridiculous number of bullets. Now, that's where the word Dakka comes from. It's orc slang for firepower, but with extra emphasis on quantity over quality. The more Dakka, the better. Precision is for Space Marines. Orcs believe if you fill the air with enough bullets, something's going to die. Now, what makes playing them so fun is that you have to lean into the madness. Things explode, they misfire, and sometimes they even work properly by accident. And that's all part of the charm. Orc players, they tend to have a laugh, even when their army is falling apart, because it's all part of the experience. You win or you lose, you're guaranteed a proper spectacle. Their orc spelling with the K, it kind of started as a running joke, but over time it's become one of the most recognisable parts of the Warhammer fandom. Most long-time hobbyists have what's called a bits box, which is a box or several, full of leftover model parts, spare guns, random gubbins and bits of plastic that might one day be useful for building something orky. It's inspired by the Meks' habit of essentially cobbling together weapons from scrap. Games Workshop even encourage it within their Golden Demon Awards, where scratch-built orc creations often steal the show. Then there's the most famous orc belief of all, that red that was smooth. I need to keep that bit in. That was what? Then there's the most famous orc belief of all, I can't talk, that red ones go faster. Now, according to orcs, like I said, painting something red makes it faster. And the thing is, in-game, it often does. It's so iconic that players, they actually paint their vehicles red for the performance bonus and obviously the meme value, but it's a scientific fact in the grim dark future. Now, orcs, they're also responsible for some of the best energy at tournaments. If you've ever been to a big Warhammer event, you've probably heard it. Players from across the room shouting "Wah!" or chanting, you know, here we go. If you haven't seen it, I'm just look like an idiot. But anyway, orc players, they treat every battle like a proper party. And if you compare that to the Imperium lot muttering "Purge the heretic" under their breath or in my comments section, it's no contest. The Orcs have been part of the Warhammer 40K universe since the very beginning, back in first edition Rogue Trader days, when they looked more like grumpy green, like World War I soldiers with stick grenades and spiked helmets. And there's even a rumour that early orc culture was loosely based on ancient Celtic warriors, big, loud and completely unbothered by the concept of death. Over the years, Games Workshop, they've streamlined their rules a little bit. They've gone are the days of the mad boys randomly changing personality mid-fight because you rolled badly on the chart. Fun, yes. Efficient, no. These days, they're all about close combat, swarming in the table in massive mobs, while players call a green tide and overwhelming the enemy through sheer numbers and noise and enthusiasm. And that's not subtle. They're not subtle. They're not elegant, but they are hilarious to play, whether you're yelling battle cries or building tanks out of glue and optimism or just watching your own gun explode in your face. Being an orc player, I think it just means embracing the chaos and loving every bloody minute of it. So yeah, maybe Games Workshop originally meant them as comic relief, but if you ask anyone who's ever unleashed a full-blown wah on the tabletop, the joke's on everyone else, because orcs aren't the funniest army in the galaxy. They're secretly the happiest. I think as far as introductions go to orcs, that's us for today. Honestly, we've barely poked the squig with the stick here. Orc lore, it's absolutely massive. There's more clans, there's more weird units, there's more fueled nonsense and enough Dakka to make your ears ring until next year's Orc-tober. Just please think of this as your beginner's briefing, a friendly shove into the green, noisy end of the pool. It's not entire orc lore, it's just the surface. So if this intro, you're probably still here like 30 minutes later. If this video, right, did the job, and you do fancy a little bit more, please say the word. If you want a little bit of a deeper dive into the clans, or, you know, a tour of Meks or Weird Boys, or, you know, Pain Boys, Gargants versus Titans, even how to start an orc army on a budget and kit bash from the bits box, please drop a comment. And I would definitely like to line up part 2 and probably 3 and 4 and 5. As ever, I'm only going to implore you one time to please do all those things you need to do to support my tiny channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.